Good morning, everyone. This is Rich Berliner from 5th Gen Media at the Connected Virtual Tech event today, day 2 of our event. And I'm really pleased that we have such a great panel for our discussion on cybersecurity ramifications. If cybersecurity is not something that's on your mind in this day and age, you are missing it, because cybersecurity is a huge issue in the work from home era. So we've put together a great panel of folks today to talk through cybersecurity and all of its ramifications for new technology and connectivity. So the panel's really been handpicked so that we have a number of different areas of expertise. I'd like to introduce Mehl Kyriannis. Min is going to be our moderator for today, and she is a whiz in my judgment. And so without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to you, Min, to introduce your panel and to ask away.
Great. Thank you, Rich, and good morning, everybody. Welcome. So a little bit about myself. I am currently the Managing Director of EMD JMK. I have over 25 years as both client and consultant in the technology world related to physical network and cybersecurity, and as well risk. So that being said, I also want to have everybody introduce themselves very quickly, so I'm going to keep myself short and sweet. I'm going to pass the mic over to Walter. Walter?
Good morning. My name is Walter Mehl. I'm a co-managing partner at Jarrow, Spelman Bowles. Been in the industry and at JB&B for 33 years. JB&B is an engineering firm, and we focus on the design and commissioning of infrastructure, largely for building systems. You know, from our founding in 1915, where we started in mechanical and plumbing, through the years we've added lighting, security, AV, and most recent, our newest additions have been a focus on DAS, emergency radio systems, and cybersecurity for building systems.
Great. Thank you, Walter. Dick?
My name is Dick Sherwin. I'm with Spot On Networks. Spot On Networks has been in existence for about 15 years, provides wireless services to multi-tenant buildings, primarily multifamily residential. We provide a managed Wi-Fi service called User-Safe Wi-Fi, which provides high-speed data and wireless and Wi-Fi calling seamlessly. We provide a passive distributed antenna system service called Cell Boost, and we offer a first responder radio communications enhancement system called Radio Boost. All of these are wireless, specifically for multi-tenant buildings.
Great. Brian?
Good morning. Brian Higgins, the founder and CEO of Aditum. I've been in the IT services field for going on 23 or 24 years now. Original background in managed services and corporate IT. Back in early 2000s, I founded a internet service provider out in the Midwest, which has since been sold, and the technology we developed for that morphed into the product we offer today, which is a multi-tenant internet access control common IP backbone for buildings. In short, we have a system that allows the building owner to become the internet provider for the tenants.
Great. David, lastly.
So hi, good morning or good afternoon for me, if you're this side of the pond. My name is David Kinnaird. I was in the British Army for 15 years as a communicator for our Queen. Came out of that and I joined MWB Business Exchange, one of the UK's first flexible workspace operators back in 2000. So I've been involved in co-working and flexible workspace for about 20 years. I joined Avanta, who briefly became one of London's largest operator of flexible workspace. So that does depend a little bit on how you define London. And I joined Essensys, my current company, as COO in 2015. And I originally joined them out in the US. And Essensys are, by our definition, the leading provider of on-demand technology for flexible workspace and for landlords who are thinking flexibly. And we deliver a friction-free experience for both tenants and members. And that's me. Thank you, Min.
Great, thank you all, and welcome everybody. So just to start off, we all know cybersecurity is very prevalent nowadays. It's on the tip of everybody's tongues, especially since everyone's required to work from home since COVID. So at this time, it's been noted that there's been an uptick of cyber attacks that's been well over 300% that's been recorded. So there's a lot more that has not been disclosed. So we know there's more that's happening out there. So with an eclectic set of panelists here, we're going to discuss cybersecurity as it relates to design, connectivity, and also what they foresee the future becoming. as we begin emerging into new technologies that's out there, such as Wi-Fi 6, CBRS, and 5G, et cetera. So obviously, if there's any questions from the audience that's out there, please put them in the Q&A. We'll address them at the end of this whole panel. And let's get started. So with Walter. So it's very impressive to hear Jarrell Spellman Bowles being around for over a century. And you've been leading the design specifically for MEP systems, but it seems like now you're also doing low voltage systems like DAS, IT, AV, and also now cybersecurity. What led you to include cybersecurity in your design, and why do you feel that it's so important, especially in all these new emerging technologies that's out there?
It started probably a couple of decades ago when, the advancement of digital controls and monitoring crept its way into the building. Early buildings were largely mechanical and manual. But as controls became digital and allowed for remote control, either other parts of the building or outside of the building, the building started, moving in a smart direction. But with that came vulnerability. And when you add in the proliferation of wired and wireless connectivity, the integration between systems to make buildings smart, the convergence to ease that integration, and now with the growth of IoT, it became abundantly clear to us that these systems and these buildings that we're designing couldn't just be put in a building because of their general mechanical capacity or configuration or capability. They had to be chosen for a building because of their technological reliability. So it was a natural step for us to say, if we're responsible for those systems, we can't just ignore the cyber threat, which has largely been a focus of the production side of the industry, not the building or the operational technology side of buildings.
And that's very interesting, which leads me to go to Brian, because you deal with all the infrastructure, correct? For buildings that's out there. So this is perfect. Since you deal with that, like, what's your thoughts and your opinions, especially with landlords dealing with the internet or infrastructure security, especially with these emerging systems?
Well, I like to classify most types of building infrastructure, at least in this context, as either critical or non-critical infrastructure. In that context, critical infrastructure is going to be anything that you need to keep secure, protect against unauthorized access or modification. Anything non-critical is the stuff that doesn't expose either downtime to the building, access security risks to the building, or other penetration besides that immediate device or object you're looking at. Some examples would be on the critical side, the HVAC control system, the security of the alarm systems, anything where you're controlling large pieces of the building. Anything non-critical would be stuff like a Wi-Fi access point, an individual security camera, where obviously those are important, but they're not critical to the building as a whole. And they need to be designed, and on the critical side, you need to design that infrastructure with not just physical, but the digital security, just as Walter was saying. The old school ways of just putting it behind a locked door and making sure it had a good lock on it was great. But now that everything's connected and you can access it remotely, that doesn't work the same anymore. And a lot of people are taking all these new technologies and take the Internet of Things devices, the smart thermostats and the HVAC control systems for the buildings, the security systems, and remote access door intercom. All of that gets funneled through the same internet connection often, and it's being done in a way that you may have one device plugged in upstream to the same network as other devices, where you can tunnel from one network to the other if you know what you're doing. And just simply even having authorized access to the network, unsecured network access, can sometimes expose those critical infrastructure pieces between different networks without even realizing it. So when we design the building infrastructure with a common IP backbone of the internet infrastructure inside that property, we make sure that every single connection is completely isolated from every other connection, so that you have an HVAC system and a security system and a door access control intercom system, and then public Wi-Fi and tenant internet connections throughout the building. No two systems are able to talk to one another any more than they would be a device that's connected to the internet here in New York versus a device that's connected in London. They have the same set of security and restrictions. And further, you can limit wireless access to networks because of that, because you don't always want wireless on some devices.
Well, and that's where Dick's going to come in and talk about Wi-Fi 6, since I feel like you were picking up on it there, that it's considered non-critical there. So Dick, what do you feel about that, what Brian just said, especially since you're dealing with wireless solutions, Wi-Fi 6 for multi-tenancies? What's your thought on all this?
You know, the way I would frame this, and I understand Brian's point about critical versus non-critical. Some building owners would disagree with him because they think that providing high-speed wireless access to residents becomes the most critical thing because that's the way they generate their rental rates.
I would completely agree with that.
And I remember Walter had a story about that.
I'm sure. I think what I would like to do is just briefly talk about Wi-Fi 6 for just a minute, because it's so new. While Wi-Fi 5 focused on increasing speed, Wi-Fi 6 is designed to do more than simply boost speed. It aims to solve congestion, reduce latency, and satisfy the growing need for efficient wireless connections by supporting more simultaneous device connections without compromising on the experience. And the interesting thing is there's a profound merger now between Wi-Fi 6 and 5G. Not only does Wi-Fi 6 reach roughly the same speed as 5G, but I think what's important is that the protocol and the multi-stream capability of Wi-Fi 6 is very imitating of 5G. It uses the same transmission protocol, or FDMA, and it uses MU-MIMO as a multi-stream capability. So there are tremendous similarities. I think with regard to security, 5G uses SIM-based security, and Wi-Fi traditionally has used Wi-Fi protected access. And the real issue with Wi-Fi protected access in the past was it had vulnerabilities which were eventually shored up. From a security standpoint, I quote Jeff Lipton of Aruba. He pointed out that Wi-Fi networks are as secure as 5G networks. Insecure networks are generally not set up properly. For example, a coffee shop network where there's no password protection, that's not going to be very secure. WPA2 Enterprise, which was included in Wi-Fi 5, the previous version of Wi-Fi, if set up properly, is very secure. But what WPA3, Wi-Fi Protected Access version 3 in Wi-Fi 6 provides is better encryption, better authentication, and it also offers opportunistic wireless encryption, something called OWE, which is a way to encrypt a conversation on non-protected communications, non-password protected communications. That's amazing. Lipton thinks that if you compare WPA3 security with LTE and 5G security, it's generally a little bit ahead as far as authentication, encryption, and things like that.
Well, one of the vulnerabilities they talked about with WPA2 Enterprise was there was a huge vulnerability that couldn't be patched, which is why they went to Wi-Fi 6.
Exactly.
And that was a big thing. And I think everyone is looking forward to Wi-Fi 6.
Exactly.
The migration.
And WPA3 is a 192-bit encryption technology.
Definitely.
And that's a significant improvement over WPA2, which was 128-bit encryption technology.
Exactly. So then, David, since you're mostly on the software side and you're dealing with a lot of flex workspace now here, what's your 2 cents on all this, especially with the integration of software into these infrastructures? And now with these emerging technologies, really hasn't been tested out there. And I'm sure there's others that are trying to probe it as much as they can, let's put it that way. What do you think about all this?
Well, I think I'll just touch briefly on the changes which I think we've seen driven by, most recently by what's happened during the pandemic, with businesses having to rapidly think about working in a far more flexible way, outside of offices and outside of buildings. And so it's driven a huge I wouldn't say it's a rush, but plans that may have been floating around for years to adopt a cloud strategy have now been brought forward. So even traditional companies that have always had on-prem systems, like insurance and banking, rapidly had to change their model to cope with a more flexibly distributed workforce. So this must have been a huge headache, and I'm sure many security experts in those companies have had to burn lots of midnight oil as they've adopted it. But now we've got there, we're clearly not going to go back. So the future is flexible, and cyber strategy for the cloud is a very different proposition from a security protocols for dealing with on-prem. And so effectively, many people have now started for the first time to outsource the security and protection of all their data sitting at rest. And so, my 2 cents would be that I think the biggest issue comes with, and to some of the points that Rich has made already about Wi-Fi, the biggest issues come with data in transit. What these remote end users working anywhere with any device are connecting to and what with. So there's a huge amount in that little sentence to try to unpick. But even with Wi-Fi, to Richard's point about changing standards in relation to encryption, we still find that in shared environments, many people are using, for example, shared passwords.
Yeah.
So regardless of the encryption, procedurally, people have adopted the wrong techniques. They've used the convenience approach. And there's many examples of major co-working operators using shared passwords, across all of their sites, at the same time making claims for a very secure Wi-Fi network. So technically secure, but procedurally very insecure. So I think these are the two things of the procedure and the technology need to go hand in hand.
And that's actually
Sure.
Very interesting, actually. But continue. Sorry about that.
Good, thank you. No, good. Let's stop with the interesting point.
Well, the interesting point is the policies and procedures, and I think I'm going to gear this towards everybody. Is that since you talk policies and procedures, it sounds like things design, infrastructure, integration, it all goes hand in hand. But that whole point about procedures, policies, it has to be in place as well. It's like, what do you think?
It's how it's implemented.
It's got to be implemented, right?
Yeah,
so, what do you think about all this? Landlords, owners, developers, all of them, should they follow, what do they need to follow in terms of processes, procedures, just to build in cybersecurity into this infrastructure, software, policies, people? And,
well, I think there's a couple of things, and I'll just two very quick points, and I'll hand over to someone else. One is that it's impossible to run procedures across a huge community based on manual input and manual changes. And so whatever procedure you're enforcing, which has to be designed now for the individual, we're now dealing with individual layers of security for an end user. So we need to give that individual his own password to access the Wi-Fi using 802.11x to use my only acronym of the day. And so you can't hope to manage all that manually. You need some form of software, some form of orchestration to deliver that across a wide user base. Otherwise, whatever procedure you write up, it's just never going to get delivered. That's my key takeaway.
Well, you know what, Brian, I think, go ahead, because I feel like you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, so that really touches on what I was saying before about designing the system and making sure that your infrastructure is designed secure. You can have the most secure Wi-Fi system in the world for your lobby or your gym or your pool. But if you take the connection that's being fed off and then plug that, behind a router, plug that into the same network and office connection that your computers or your HVAC system or something else is using, you just negated any amount of security that there is by allowing direct access from one network into another by failure of design.
Well, Dick.
So,
And that wasn't targeted at Dick. That was.
Well, I'm going to put Bolter to that because I see him grinning.
okay. But I think Brian's point is well taken. The fact of the matter is that there are several procedural ways, as David points out, that can increase the security. And one of the things that I think is interesting is our network doesn't allow duplicate passwords. You can't have two people on the network with the same user ID and the same password. So that's one software mechanism that prohibits that kind of a situation. The second is many companies using our networks now require VPN access to their servers. And I think that's really important. That's a procedural issue, Min, as you point out. And VPN does, when tunneling, make a very, very secure connection.
That's assuming to set it up right, too. We know that. But then I'm going to go to Walter. Since you do all these designs from the very beginning, greenfield buildings, all the buildings ground up, how do you tie all this together? I mean, the processes, the procedures, the planning, the design, then you have to get people like Dick, Brian, and David all kind of emerged together to talk about this new technology and it operating together. How do you see that, foresee that happening?
Well, the biggest hurdle, man, I think, in the past was creating awareness with the client side. There wasn't a focus on cyber for the buildings. Getting over that hurdle, the next round of awareness was what the nature of their infrastructure is. It's not just a wired device. It now involves wireless. It involves the cloud and service level agreements. It's the collective whole that protects and runs the building. So that second awareness or discovery for a lot of our clients is, what is the totality of all that? Once you start with that and you get them on board, and whoever's solving the cyber solution, either for an existing building or a new design, once you get that behind you, then it's addressing the issue. And another round of awareness is cyber isn't even so much about as much passwords and authentication. It's got physical security aspects to it. I mean, I liken the example to a house. You can have the most robust fence around your house, and you can have the loudest dog, and you can have the heaviest door locks. But if your child invites a friend in and gives her the Wi-Fi password, then all those other measures mean nothing. Yeah. So it's creating that awareness with our clients that it transcends literally a wired device and a password. It goes to policies and procedures. And some of these even leave the building. For all the manufacturers that have supplied that equipment, what are they doing in their own houses? Because a lot of times support for that building goes to those manufacturers checking out the health of the equipment. And if they don't even have good policies and procedures internally, then that becomes another doorway in for a bad actor. So we start with understanding everything that goes into it, checking all of these mechanisms from the reliability of the device to the network, to the manufacturer and their house. And then it usually finishes with good policies and procedures so that Wi-Fi password is not handed out to your neighbor or your friend.
Well, oftentimes, weirdly, sometimes it's the security devices that lead to the security breach. So cameras used to be one of the weakest devices on the network because their password was never changed, typically by installers, and they represented a really good backdoor in. So security device became security breach, So watch out for that.
Well, Shodan. I think we all heard of Shodan, correct? I hope so. Where all the internet IP addresses are listed, anything that's public that's out there, and we try to probe every IP address that seems vulnerable that's there. But that leads to an interesting point, Brian. So Walter talked about bringing awareness to the owners themselves. Now that you're brought in, how do you implement these processes, these procedures in place now in order to ensure the infrastructure, the internet security is in place, especially with like Wi-Fi 6, CBRs? Like, these are new technologies that people don't typically know about. Like, what do you do?
So on our end of the technology, we enforce strict isolation between all connections. There is no bypassing it with our system. So if you have a internet connection that you're feeding into a CBRS system, and you have another connection that you're feeding into the common Wi-Fi for the shared access spaces in the building, and you have another connection that you feed off to the security, the door access control, maybe the HVAC, any of these different services, the leasing office for their computers, all of those different connections that you're feeding off into the building to serve all that infrastructure, they are inherently isolated by our system. You cannot bridge from one to the other. No matter what you do, they are completely isolated. And they each have their own independent firewall that is able to be set up and customized and configured based on the needs of that particular service. And as well as guaranteed performance access, since you can't do that over any Wi-Fi or any wireless for that matter.
But it sounds like you need someone technical to do all this. How do you
Do it.
translate that information to the owners who may not necessarily understand what you've just done? Like a typical
So-
lady out there.
In our case, that's one of the selling points, is that you don't need to have someone technical to do it, because it's inherent to the system design and you can't implement it any other way. So we make sure that if the system is operational, if you have implemented it in such a way that you have connectivity to the leasing office and you have connectivity to the camera system, they are separated, they are isolated.
I'm
We
gonna
go
go-
we go one step further, Min.
Yeah.
We actually isolate each client device on our network. So that prohibits any kind of access from device to device.
Okay. And then you convey that to the owners, the developers, like this is what we're doing.
We actually give a session to the owners,
Okay.
agents,
Mhm.
and the property management team on how the network works, why it's secure, what to tell the residents or the tenants. And we actually we have a 24/7 help desk that handles all the tenant needs.
And that's very interesting. How do you validate this though? And I'm throwing out, I know I'm just kind of throwing a curveball out there, but how do you validate all this, that everything is functioning the way it's supposed to be doing?
Pen
set up
testing.
properly?
Yeah,
Yep.
I'll jump in. You need to at least an annual, perhaps biannual pen test by a third party, and
Okay.
I keep changing around the third party. It's key.
Fair
Sorry,
enough.
that probably wasn't my question. I just
No, please. I'd rather people just chime in, because I think listening to various perspectives, like Brian is on infrastructure. You have Richard who understands Wi-Fi, CBRS, and all the other things. Walter, who's actually bringing everything together. And then you on the software and now having to utilize this backbone, the infrastructure that's there. I think.
yeah, well, our software orchestrates connectivity as well as providing but so it's similar in many ways to Brian, but I think gaining external accreditation is important. So an ISO 9001 or 27001 for security, part of that regime is clearly involved in pen testing and actually making those pen test results public too, as far as you can. Which I think just gives, certainly in terms of the types of things that have been discovered. No one's clean, right? So you always need to be open door about what people have discovered and make sure that once the doors have been found, that you've closed them off. I think ISO, we went through the ISO experience a couple of years ago and found that difficult and transformative. It's a huge blue tick for us, I think, and any organization that is thinking, working in a multi-tenanted space or working with any sort of B2B transaction, I think an ISO accreditation is absolutely key to, or something similar, SOC 2 for the US would be key to making sure that at least your internal processes of your partner are sort of covered off appropriately.
That's actually very good. I mean, Brian, is this something that you guys implement also as well, to pen testing third-party assessments that has to happen?
Well, obviously we can't do a third-party assessment of ourselves.
No, obviously not. Yeah. I hope not. Conflict of interest there.
We do engage in self-testing of our stuff internally, and we welcome anyone that wants to implement a pen test against one of the buildings that are deployed.
Dick, is that something you want to do for Brian?
No,
Sure.
Just asking.
Yeah.
So what we do is we do a coverage assessment test procedure when we turn over the network, and we'll go back on an annual basis and redo that. And yes, you're right, Brian. It's not a third-party assessment because we're doing our own testing on our own network. But what we do is because we monitor the networks, we try to make sure that the network performs as we've promised.
That's actually good. Walter, I'm going to put you in a hot seat right now, because you're both designing for other people right now, and then you have to run your internal stuff. What do you guys do?
Sorry, man, you got to repeat that. I'm sorry.
So what does JB&B do? And I'm not going to say anything, but you have to design systems out there that have to be secured for your clients as well. But then you also have your internal network that has to be. So how do you assess all this now at this point? Like, what do you think would be an ideal situation for you to assess all this?
I think an ideal situation would be, besides going in and doing physical evaluation, meeting with the client, walking the facility. It's really when you get access to the network. You want to get access in a non-disruptive way. You don't want to invite someone to the dinner party who steals the conversation. You want someone in the room who's listening
Mhm.
and trying to see, should someone not be in that room, and what's the nature of the conversations? So it starts with scanning, sniffing, and penetration testing to see, is something, out of the ordinary for the type of traffic that building operational systems speak. That's the key. And then ultimately, it doesn't stop there. When we would design generators or cooling towers for a building, we could say to our clients, they're going to last 20, 30, 40 years if they're properly maintained. You may replace some sheet metal, a fan belt,
Mhm.
change the oil. When it comes to cybersecurity and infrastructure, you have to be on top of it. It never goes away. You are patching on a daily basis. It's a new norm in terms of how you run a building. It was a similar conversation, a decade ago. We started getting involved with wireless systems, and more importantly, over the last 5 years, we're telling our clients, if you're putting in a cellular DAS, don't expect that that's a 20 or 30-year asset. 5 years from now, it could be largely an overhaul to keep current. People will go to the building if the water is not running. They may go to the building if the air conditioning or the lights are out. They will not go to the building if there's not cellular or Wi-Fi connectivity. They'll stay home.
Oh, no, that's
I
perfect.
think that particularly applies now. If you've made the effort to go into the office now, given all of the challenges that are put before you in terms of mass transportation, and you put your face mask on, and you've got into the crowded tube, you've been sneezed on by 20 people. When you get to the office, it better be working. It actually better work. That's the last thing you need, is for it not to be there. And I think it's said in jest, but I think it now becomes critical. The transition from home to office and flip-flopping between the two is kind of where people are going to be in this zone. And if the office ever fails to deliver, then they're not going to go there again.
How true is
So,
that?
Min, we've got a question from the field, and
Okay.
I think this is a good one to ask. I think you may have answered this, but someone asked the question. They said they joined late. Everyone leading the charge on CBRS for private LTE claims that Wi-Fi is not secure enough. Please explain why LTE or 5G security is clearly superior to Wi-Fi 6.
You should
So
direct that
that
towards
may be a misnomer, so take it
I
from
want to
there.
provide the answer after somebody else answers.
Sorry, I'm looking at it and I'm like, I think that's Dick. That's all you, Dick.
That's all you, Dick.
So 5G, LTE, 4G, LTE, all are SIM-based security, SIM card-based security. What that means is that because the individual device used on the cellular networks has a unique SIM card, it addresses that device and knows that device, and nothing can substitute for it except 4G LTE have experienced what is called stingrays. They are like man-in-the-middle cell sites that capture the SIM information and then use it to counterfeit presence on a network and pull various data. It's a secure network. There are many experts who think that SIM card-based security is better than Wi-Fi protected access security. SIM card-based security used for 5G, 4G LTE, and CBRS is a good secure mechanism. Wi-Fi protected access, WPA version 3 in Wi-Fi 6, many experts now think it's a more secure network than ever before, and even more secure than the SIM card security. I don't have an opinion on which is more secure. I think they are both secure. And what WPA3 did, what the Wi-Fi Alliance did with WPA3 was to enhance the security using 192-bit encryption, which is superior, and uses opportunistic wireless access. And it really reduces the possibility of security violation, even with poor password protection. So I think, I don't know whether I've answered the question well enough or not. I think that whoever says Wi-Fi security is poor is basically not correct.
I suggest also, Richard, that if you're in the middle of a building, it's unlikely that you're going to get a 5G signal anyway. And so as a
Right on,
user,
right on, David.
as a user, you're going to have to use what's with you, which is going to be Wi-Fi. So you're going to have to trade off some of these. I don't agree that Wi-Fi is any less secure if it's implemented properly and you're have got the right procedures alongside it. But above all, you need something you're going to use. So 5G is interesting, but it's only going to be at the edges of our big, deep buildings we're going to have access to.
Well, David, Rich Berliner would disagree with you because his point is that CBRS is an in-building wireless connectivity method that can be used when 5G can penetrate.
Well, I'm going to throw this at Brian and Walter because one does design, another does integration. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, interesting, because we're talking a lot about 5G right now, but there's still a lot more to be written on 5G.
Yeah.
So at this point, I want to be more of a listener than a speaker. I think Dick summed it up quite well, and David raises a good point about the buildings. But we also want to report there's a lot more to come. We're designing new buildings right now that probably won't open for 4 or 5 years, and we're telling our clients, plan for it, allocate this much money. But there is no definite infrastructure in place in the carriers on the 5G that we know it in True Cellular. There are 5G offerings. I think I can buy Wonder Bread right now that's rated 5G. But I'm talking about True Cellular 5G. There's more to be written.
That's true. And Brian, what do you think about this? Like, especially with people talking these buzzwords, connectivity, 5G, Wi-Fi 6, CBRS, all these buzzwords that's out there. Are we there yet, or premature, you feel?
As far as 5G goes, I don't think we're there yet. It's still too early, too new to really know what it's going to look like in 2 to 4 years, 5 years. The only thing we do know is that most of the 5G spectrum is high enough frequency that it's not going to penetrate buildings. Most of it's not even going to penetrate walls. So if you're going to deploy a true 5G deployment, you're going to have access points, DAS units, where you have antennas every 50 to 100 feet inside of a building. And what that's going to look like down the road, I don't know. Cellular is a little outside of what we touch on normally, so I'm not an expert on it. But I will say that I think if you're going to design a building with long-term connectivity in mind, you need to plan for wired services inside the building and then have the last foot
And security in mind. We can't forget that.
Hey, man, I want to go back to points that both Brian and Dick made.
No,
I like the fact that Dick said they're both more secure and there really is no winner yet. And I would agree with that. And Brian's points also, some clients are saying, well, if you don't know the system, what do I allocate now? What's my plan in terms of the financial? And to the exact point Brian raised, because of that lack of penetration capability, and there's probably over a doubling of antennas, we're literally, told them, take, your old 4G metrics, and you probably need to double that right now until more evolves for the overall in-building guideline.
I think one of the things we can't avoid is the fact that the kind of the consumer, the end user, is king here. And so whatever facilities you provide them, it's what they come with is what they're going to want to connect with. And so we certainly see in many of our client spaces that certainly actually interesting enough in the US, there's in certain areas, there's huge adoption for Wi-Fi, like no one is plugging in or very few people are using their provided Ethernet connectivity. And so sometimes 400, 500, 600 people simultaneously connecting on Wi-Fi. And actually, interesting enough, simultaneously trying to run Zoom calls. You see 100 people trying to run a Zoom call. And you've got to be aware that, of course, as we all are on the call, that there's a performance limit, fundamentally the way the protocol works. And so to Brian's point, having both options, having Ethernet for people to plug into, having Wi-Fi for people to access, making them both equally secure, having no way that people can break down the procedural issues that come with that is kind of the neat trick. I think it's fascinating what happens with 5G. I think 5G will solve some connectivity issues for distant buildings, and actually as people start to want to work in more suburban environments, but maybe not work so much in the major metros, 5G will kind of provide that, what was the last mile to the location, to give them the equivalent of fiber access in terms of connectivity, but I think pretty much for the short to medium term, Wi-Fi will be the predominant mechanism for people connecting inside a building.
Vic?
That's my prediction.
So I certainly agree with what David just said, man. But I think there's another piece to this. And I saw that there was a question about man in the middle that came off the Q&A.
Well, mostly a comment,
Yeah.
which we can address, yeah.
I think that the WPA3 and Wi-Fi 6 really solves the man in the middle problem, much like the cellular operators are trying to solve the Stingray problem, because it's effectively a man in the middle.
Yep.
And I frankly don't see that WPA3 will not solve the problem. It was like when WPA2 had the crack problem, the vulnerability became shored up very quickly.
Right.
I think WPA3 is the same, but I think there's an important point to be made. Today, in the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands, in each building, there's roughly 600 megahertz of bandwidth available to Wi-Fi. With Wi-Fi 6 on those two bands, with MU-MIMO and the OFDMA protocol, you basically have up to 92 individual channels from every access point that are singularly used by a device. And that's really important. With Wi-Fi 6E, each building will now have 1.6 gigahertz of bandwidth, which means you can run 256 megabit channels, and you can really create major speed, major capacity inside a building. And I think from Walter's perspective, that's something that building owners should be planning for 5 years out.
Definitely. So then, because I'm looking at a clock right now, so then it leads me then, because of security, we have to have security in mind as we're developing and implementing these systems. Do you feel that we're in a good place with security, especially with these systems that are now being implemented, or will be even implemented in the next 2 to 5 years down the line? And you know what? I'm going to start with Brian right now. What do you think about that?
Actually, I wanted to just step back and then I'll answer
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
So what David was mentioning about the design and long-term implications of 5G, I think it's important to recognize that 5G isn't really designed to fill the inside of buildings so much as it is designed to address high density, high capacity throughput scenarios in large areas, stadiums, bus stations, Grand Central, anywhere you have large numbers of people. That's what 5G is really meant for. Inside buildings, specifically in the a high density apartment building, I don't think 5G is going to ever have a high penetration. It's basically going to be 4G.
Yeah,
plus.
Brian, what I meant was that if you had a building in a suburban location that didn't have fiber, and you couldn't get good either broadband or good fiber access, actually 5G could be used as the last mile by the ISP.
Sure. Yeah, as a backbone.
Yeah, correct. As a backbone connection. Yeah, that's what I was
actual filling out and penetration of the building itself. I don't think you're going to see what we are commonly seeing in the media as 5G. You're just not going to see that on the inside hallway of the 18th floor of a building, without extremely expensive DAS deployments, which probably aren't going to be very common.
Anyone that's trying to find good fiber connectivity in Brooklyn will be crying out for 5G. There's kind of nothing out there.
I need good connectivity by my house right now. We don't have fiber. It's killing me. I'm very lucky this is still working.
But at the same time, a Q&A question about QoS over LTE, 5G, and Wi-Fi 6, I'll drop the man in the middle part. I think I do want to address that the only way you can do QoS, true QoS, is have a wired connection up to that last foot. The shorter the distance that your Wi-Fi signal or your wireless signal travels, the less interference it's going to have, and the less interference from other outside sources are going to degrade the system. Anything wireless can't be guaranteed. There is no true QoS of any sort on a wireless spectrum because of outside spectrum interference. But if you can minimize the distance, minimize the amount of walls and other wireless devices that you're contending with, you're going to be able to improve that.
Right. Richard, do you want to chime in, or do you want to go to the next questions? Because I feel like a little.
My own view is I think Brian's theory is correct, but the issue that that has been neglected is Wi-Fi 6 changes that theory, because it allocates individual frequencies to individual devices, especially in the 6 gigahertz band. And so I think you're going to find that while Brian's theory is correct, in practicality, if you are inside a building, I don't think you have the problem.
All right. So then because time is of the essence right now, do you think we're in a good place with security with these emerging systems that's there right now? And you know what, David, if that's all right, I'm going to start with you. What do you think?
Are we in a good place?
Yeah. Are we in a good place?
Are
we in a bad place?
I think it depends where you start. I mean, this panel's about landlords, and probably landlords that might be thinking about this challenge. And it kind of, I think it could, you have to take the question back to what it is they're trying to achieve, and whether they're dealing with systems, so cyber for their own systems, like the sort of systems that Walter's been talking about, systems that run the building and systems that are designed to, or are they thinking about systems that are designed to serve their tenants and to serve their people in the space? And it's a pretty incredible question to kind of even be thinking about if you're a landlord, because this is not something that landlords would have been thinking about 10 years ago. And we probably have to thank the flexible workspace industry for making landlords think more about the service layers and going down into, so suddenly they're not just having to think about, and building owners not having to think about the security of their HVAC system, but they're now thinking about, John Smith's, I said John Doe, that's someone else, John Smith's Wi-Fi connection on the 15th floor. So the first question they've got to ask is, do they want to do that? Do they want to, or do landlords want to offer these deeper service provisions? And I think we've got this, as we touched on earlier, about flexibility. If people are thinking flexible and thinking about how they can drive occupancy in these in buildings and trying to avoid the void, as it were, then kind of providing some form of connectivity is a solution to that problem. And so in providing it, it means you've got to own it, you've got to manage it, it's got to be ready. And so suddenly, this is now something which landlords have traditionally just not done. And so is cyber, now so far I get to the question, is cyber fit for purpose in that area? Well, I don't think a landlord wants to get into that. They need to be partnering with someone to provide that way seamlessly for people. And so for users coming through the space, there's a seamless transition for both the move in, occupying the space, and then enjoying it and using it every day, access control, Wi-Fi, a very simple way of attributing passwords and managing all of that. And so, yeah, I think it potentially could be a huge headache. And of course, the obvious answer is to partner with someone that's been doing it for 20 years. I can't think of anyone.
No, and that's fair. And
but my key point is that this is a major paradigm shift for a bricks and mortar, fairly industry which is being concerned about enterprise rent values and about borrowing money. Suddenly now it's a very different paradigm for thinking about all the complexity of providing technology for occupants.
No, that's perfect. You know what, Walter, I'm going to throw the question at you also, but also throw in the last part of it is, what do you see this evolving into in say in the next 2 to 5 years with this new technologies?
Yeah, it's interesting, and we're talking now post-pandemic, or I guess we're definitely not on the backside of it yet, but mid-pandemic. The pro forma has been rewritten for a lot of our clients in terms of where they're going to spend the money and if they're even going to get the rent that they had previously planned on. And that affects more than one sector, not just commercial, but residential in dense urban environments. We've seen a big flood out to the burbs because of all the risks. With that pro forma being rewritten, the technology's there.
Right.
It's a matter of going back to that term I said earlier, is awareness and desire. I think David touched upon that as well.
Mhm.
What do the owners of these buildings want to do, and for which aspect? Is it for the tenant, or is it about the building systems? So, I mean, we have the capability. It's just a matter of, is it going to take a major event that is going to come right to the forefront to get many to move on spending that dollar? But I do think regardless, that's really just about how fast we get to that level. I think in the next 5 years, cybersecurity will be as important of a determining factor of the systems and the designs that you choose as anything else that you use as a metric to build and run your buildings.
That's perfect. Before we go to Richard and Brian, there was a question that came in really, and that's very important. It came from Chuck Niswanger. What do you advise building owners whose response to an in-building wireless coverage discussion is that they think the coverage is adequate, and we're likely to have much higher priority technology projects? No need to discuss it now. Okay, what needs to happen to convince landlords that this project should be a higher priority in their technology roadmap? And you know what? I'm going to let David do it. I'm going to bounce to Richard, Brian, and then Walter, if you want to finish that off. I think that's perfect.
I think briefly, Wi-Fi is definitely not a fix it and forget it. People have already touched on the fact that technology's changed, so already your existing access points might well not be Wi-Fi 6 compatible. So, 3 to 4 years certainly for the devices, but in terms of coverage and interference and co-channel interference, these places need to be surveyed and surveyed regularly. And so we would say at least annually, but also they should also be have a Wi-Fi health score. So the system, the controller, the devices that you're using should come together to give you a sense of Wi-Fi health, which is taking all of the data, and there's a lot of data involved, to give you a health score such that you know where on a floor or an area there's a problem, and then you can go and investigate it. And this should be real time, and what you don't want to do is be having users failing to connect. You should be knowing there's an issue to go and correct it before users say, I've got a problem. It is the holy grail. I think we're starting to crack this, but it's a tough job, and people need to manage it actively. That's what I would say.
You got to crack a lot of people. Dick?
Yeah.
So David couldn't have said I can't say anything more than what David just said. We monitor our access points. We check to see if there's interference. The technology that we use measures the interference from other sources. And when we get a connection issue, we know it almost immediately, and we manage that process. I agree with David 100%.
What about in terms of cybersecurity with these new systems 2 to 5 years down the line? And then what do you see evolving with cyber as we kind of move into all these new technologies that's happening?
So that's a very good point, Min. There are some groups right now which include the Wireless Broadband Alliance, the Wi-Fi Alliance, the Next Generation Network Alliance. All of these groups have been fashioning standards in order to provide the protection needed for this wireless connectivity. We support them, and we follow the information very carefully. Our technology group is right on top of it. We think we have to do that literally every day.
That's perfect. Brian?
Well, we take a little bit different approach with our infrastructure design. So we send that signal in wired into their units, and we design the system in such a way that the landlords are also able to monetize that system directly. So when we go to answer the question, obviously, when we're advising them on what to do about inadequate internet coverage, we're not just limiting that to Wi-Fi. We're saying all internet connectivity in the building, and we're showing the property owner a route where they can generate a positive cash flow stream month over month for the life of the building, or at least the life of the existence of the internet. Wow. And we're saying, instead of looking at it from just how much does it cost to fix this, look at how much you're leaving on the table by not doing this. So you can actually have a nice profit center if you do this correctly. And When it comes to the connectivity issues and the spectrum, we address that mostly by saying we're going to have an access point in the form of a gateway router, Wi-Fi access inside each unit. So the tenant's never going to be more than 25 feet away and the bedroom wall away from the access point, which significantly minimizes a lot of those problems. The
definitely.
closer the access point, the fewer the problems will be.
So in terms of what your thoughts are in terms of being a good place with security, 2 to 5 years down the line, and then what do you see this happening in terms of, and then I'm going to go straight to Walter to answer the question, because I think he's going to be able to tie that together since he deals with a lot of clients.
In 2 to 5 years, and what's the security going to look like on internet and Wi-Fi?
What do you feel the trends are going to be?
The big trend is going to be device security and software security. I think the industry on the infrastructure side is going to be a lot more aware of the need to implement connectivity and the need to implement secure connectivity. But I think people like myself and Walter that are going in advising on the whole building infrastructure side of things, and David, when we're saying, here's how you implement at the building level, I don't think much is going to change in the next 2 to 5 years, because we're already preaching those processes and methodologies that they need to be doing. It's not really any different in a few years, except it's going to be done a lot more commonly.
Agreed. Walter, in terms of the question, I mean, you deal with the clients a lot. How would you address that?
Yeah, by the way, it's a great question that Chuck asked. I think it was touched on by all three. In the next 2 to 5 years, what will be the impetus to get clients to just say, not just say, I'm okay?
Yeah.
I think we need some standards. There should be a proof that connectivity is strong throughout, and there should be proof that you're protected both wired and wirelessly, and even through service level agreements to the cloud on cybersecurity. And I do believe that will come. And some clients will be proactive. Some look at their real estate portfolio now as a technology portfolio. They've substituted the word technology for real estate, and I think that's pretty interesting. And when you do think about it, right now, myself, I'm working at home, and it won't be long before it'll be split between home and the office. So, JB&B to me is my technology right now, and less about, where my desk is. But I think it'll be a combination of some proactive owners moving on it because that's just in their DNA, and it will be the standards being rewritten, and the others will have to catch up, because if they don't, they won't be able to compete in the marketplace with those buildings that have that certification, which I think is coming on both fronts.
Right, definitely.
So,
and with that, I have to apologize. We are out of time. So thank you, panelists. I'm going to hand the mic over to Rich again. Rich, thank you. All yours.
That was a terrific, very great, really good back and forth. I think you guys interacted with each other terrifically. Thank you very much for doing this. I do want to make sure we mention for everyone listening in to please visit our exhibitors, and to also go to all the chat rooms and engage the exhibitors in their booths and in the other chat rooms that are there. We also have a leaderboard, and there are enormous amount of prizes. Nokia is giving away a system. We are also doing Amazon gift cards. We also have a bunch of Apple watches and other equipment. So please, everyone, go in and interact with the folks on the floor. Again, panel, thank you so much. This was a great topic and a really well threshed out discussion. So thank you all. And
thank you. Yeah,
thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Nice to meet you guys. Thank you. Thank you, Mehl.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks,
And
man.
by the way, there's someone that says you guys did amazing. So I wanted to say that from the Q&A. Thank you, gentlemen. Take care. Bye.